look at Mordechai's position, Mordechai's position seems to be, it's kind of hard to tell exactly where he's holding. He's a little bit of he's the king's advisor, so he's obviously involved with politics. And the question is who's pushing who in terms of him and Esther. But the Gemara says about Mordechai that Mordechai b'derek Moshe b'derek. Mordechai is similar to Moshe. The two of them were the ultimate leader in each of their generations. So what that means is that the two of them represent, obviously, Moshe more than anybody else. He represents the prototypical Jewish leader, the ultimate Jewish leader, in terms of his complete and absolute self-sacrifice. Actually, what we just read in Shachri today, we just read, of course, is the 13 midos harachamim, the 13 attributes of mercy, which come as a result of the sin of the golden calf, and Hashem threatens to wipe out the Jewish people and make Moshe into the father of the next Jewish nation. And Moshe absolutely refuses this. And not only that, he says, if you don't forgive the Jewish people, wipe me out of your book. I don't want to have anything to do with it. So there's total and absolute dedication to his people to the point of sacrificing himself, not just in terms of his own position, what he gains, but Moshe's whole existence is Torah. And despite the fact that his existence is Torah, he's willing to ask Hashem, wipe me out of the Torah, take me out completely if you don't forgive the Jewish people. So the prototypical, the greatest level of Jewish leadership is exemplified by Moshe, because Moshe is completely subservient to his people. Subservient, not in terms of the idea of losing perspective on leadership, but he knows that his leadership is for the people, it's not for himself. Nowadays, there's a whole theory of leadership that's called servant leadership. Many of you might have come across it. There's a book called Servant Leadership by Robert Greenleaf, and I believe he was the one who pushed this idea that the true leader is not the one who's in control. The true leader is the one who understands that his job is to be serving the people. So his whole existence is about the people, it's not about himself. And that concept is not coming from Robert Greenleaf in the 1960s, whenever he wrote the book. The concept is absolutely a Jewish one. That's absolutely what a Jewish leader is supposed to be. And you see that clearly when Moshe Rabbeinu is accused by the Jewish people of taking the leadership for himself. He says clearly, and Shmuel also says something similar. Have I taken any of their donkeys? Have I taken anything? Have I received anything as a result of the position that I hold? So Mordechai was similarly completely and absolutely subservient to the Jewish people. Moshe's generation had a particular flavor, so to speak, to it, and Mordechai's generation had a different flavor to it. Moshe's generation was, of course, taking the Jewish people out of Egypt and teaching them Torah. They're referred to as the Dor Dea, the generation of knowledge, because of the fact that they knew God, so to speak, in a way that future generations would never know. But Moshe was teaching them Torah one-on-one. He was giving everybody the capability that would allow Judaism to be able to foster future generations into the future. So Moshe's generation was primarily focused on, after taking them out of Egypt, teaching them Torah. Mordechai's responsibility was primarily with regards to self-sacrifice, to inspire the Jewish people and keep the Jewish people maintaining their Judaism under fire. That even though Haman wanted to wipe out of the Jews, they were going to stand up proud of being Jewish, and they were going to come and express their Judaism within themselves. So Mordechai is compared to Moshe because of the fact that he likewise is a primary example of a leader in Judaism. Yet, despite that, at the end of the Megillah says that Mordechai was accepted by most of his generation. Immediately before that is I'm forgetting the exact terminology in a second, but he was only appreciated by most of the people around him. And so there's a classic interpretation. The reason why is because the Sanhedrin didn't appreciate the fact that he had to go deal with politics. He now, as the chief advisor to Achashverosh, he was not able to put nearly as much emphasis and time into Torah study as he was before. But the question is, if you're talking about a leader on the level of who's compared to Moshe Rabbeinu, how could people have any problem with that, with what he's doing? Obviously, what he's doing is on the highest of spiritual levels. He knows what he's doing. He was, of course, a colleague of Ezra and Nehemiah and the prophets. So, how could anybody have a problem with him? And the Sanhedrin in particular, how could they have a problem with him? So one of the explanations is a very interesting one. Mordechai came from a previous generation. He was one of the exiles. He was a man who came from the experience of the pre-destruction of the temple. He came from the world of what we can refer to as the Talmud Yerushalmi. Talmud Yerushalmi is very different than the Talmud Bavli because the Talmud Yerushalmi has question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. It doesn't have discussions the same way you have in Talmud Bavli. And the reason for that, and then, by the way, just historically speaking, the Talmud Yerushalmi, a Jerusalem Talmud, is actually older than the Babylonian Talmud. But the reason for that is that the experience of Yerushalayim, of the Jerusalem Talmud, is one of light and revelation, and not one of exile and struggle. Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, of course, is the result of exile and struggle and darkness and trying to figure out what's the answer. And so there's much more give and take, there's much more conversation. And the conversation, you go through various options until you finally select the option that is the most clear. Mordechai lived in a Talmud Yerushalmi world. He still maintained the spirituality and the godliness of the pre-exile experience. And he was able to maintain that on a regular basis. He was able to live that on a regular basis. So therefore, his study of Torah was such where he could encapsulate the entire concept in one tiny bit. And so even though he spent less time because he had to deal with the needs of his people, he was still able to accomplish the same thing that the members of the Sanhedrin were able to accomplish with their struggles, with their Talmud Bavli approach. So he wasn't lessened by his involvement with the Jewish people. He was able to actually tap into a greater element of Torah. And interestingly enough, this is something that the Alter Rebbe talks about, that the Alter Rebbe says that a person who spends time teaching other people does not lose themselves. In fact, as a result of teaching other people, you're able to gain 1,000 times as much. Elef pa'amim kacha. And the Rebbe quoted this to many, many people who wanted to spend time and focus on themselves, their own spiritual pursuits. And the Rebbe quoted this idea from from the Alter Rebbe and said, he's not exaggerating. When he says 1,000 times as much, he's saying that quite literally, if not even more than 1,000 times as much. When you put the effort into teaching somebody else, you're not losing out. Psychologically, of course, that makes sense, because when you're teaching something to somebody else, you're able to gain clarity in your own mind. Because in order to be able to teach, you need to understand the idea. And oftentimes, when teaching an idea, something that you may not have understood properly sometimes clarifies itself in the course of teaching. So there's incredible gain, and that's the reason why the Talmud says, of course, I gain much from my colleagues, and I gain much from my teachers, even more from my colleagues, but I gain the most from my students, because the process of giving is itself one in which we do not lose. And that was something that Mordechai lived in. And his colleagues were not able to understand that, because they were in a place of exile, and they had been born into that exile, and that's the reason why he was only appreciated by most of his people. But in terms of leadership, we need to look at Mordechai, and we see exactly what leadership is all about. And every single one of us are leaders in our own worlds, whether it's in our own homes, or whether it's with our colleagues, or whether it's with people who know a little bit less than us. We are all leaders. We need to stand up and realize what's our job. Our ultimate job is to lead other people to be connected to God. And that's done by recognizing where the people are, and by realizing not to force something on somebody else, but to connect with them. And as connecting with them, you're able to bring them closer to God. So that's a little bit of another concept of Purim that you might want to reflect on as we hear the Megillah tonight and tomorrow. I will be, as you can tell, I'll be on base at MacDill Air Force Base tonight and tomorrow morning, coming back to Miami, hopefully in the afternoon, in time to be able to celebrate with my family. But I hope that wherever you are, you'll be able to celebrate with joy and goodness and gladness and honor. Every Jew everywhere should be able to celebrate properly. Okay. So we were in the Mimer. I believe we're on page 4. And so we're asking about the question of the four sons asks. This is considered the wise son, and he's asking, what are these mitzvot? What are they all about? And the main critical question that we're asking is, what kind of simplistic question is this? That this is supposed to be a chacham, and this is supposed to be the smart son. How is he asking such a simple question? What are the mitzvot and what are they all about? He doesn't even understand the basics, not the basics of that they're beneficial to the human being, and not the basics of the fact is that you were created to serve God. And so he gave an explanation that what he's asking is that he's asking the question of Asher tziva Hashem Elokeinu etchem, God, our God, commanded you. And what he's specifically asking with this particular term, etchem, you, is because he's differentiating the difference between the way the Jewish people served God prior to Mount Sinai, the patriarchal approach to serving God, versus after Mount Sinai. Prior to Mount Sinai, there was service of God. The primary focus of the service was in the intent and the spiritual accomplishments. After Mount Sinai, the primary focus is the physical deed, the interaction with physicality. And the spiritual intent is wonderful. Tanya refers to it as wings that causes the prayer to fly. But the primary focus is not on the spiritual intent. It is specifically in the action. Like we said, if you have all the intents in the world about matzah and you don't actually eat the matzah, you haven't accomplished anything. And so that was what we used the word etchem. You serve the God in this way, but you would think that the primary mode of serving God would be through spirituality. It would not be through physicality. And so that was the question that we asked. And the answer that we gave was Avadim Ma'inu L'Parav B'Mitzrayim V'Yitzayinu Hashem Elokeinu B'Mitzrayim V'Yitzavenu Hashem Lasot Kol HaChokim Ha'ela, that the whole process of leaving Egypt, the entire process of, in fact, actually going through the Egyptian exile, and then afterwards leaving Egypt, was in order to be able to give us the capability of connecting to God. So the example for this is the verse states, Paro Hikriv, and Paro came close to the Jewish people while they're on the Red Sea and they are about to cross over, but Paro and his army are coming close to the Jewish people. And the Medrash says, Paro Hikriv, what does it mean that he came close? The word means Hikrivet Liban Shel Yisrael La'aviyam Shabashamayim, that he brought close the hearts of the Jewish people to their Father in heaven. So the entire process of what had gone through brought the Jewish people to a point where they were able to connect to God in a completely different level. That led to Mount Sinai, and that was where they had the ability to be able to serve God on this level, where they're taking physicality and using it towards God's godliness. So that's what we're up to on page 5 in chapter 2. At this point, when we take a closer look at the question, we see there's something deeper going on. So he says, the reopening of question 4. So if the wise son's question is about the pre versus post giving of the Torah mitzvahs, he should have just said, Asher tziva havaya Elokeinu otanu, which Hashem our God has commanded us, because he is also living after the giving of the Torah. Fact of the matter is that when he uses the term etchem, he is separating himself from his father who is asking the question. He should have used the term otanu. And he continues, he says, we would still understand that the added word otanu to differentiate, he did that in order to differentiate between our present-day mitzvot and the ones done by our forefathers. Otherwise, he could have left it at Asher Tziva Havaya Elokeinu. So why does this wise son mention the word etchem? Why does he use the word at all? That question has still not satisfactorily been answered. Based on the answer that we've given so far, the truth is that we haven't really fully answered the question. We said that he wants to differentiate, but the fact of the matter is he could have noted that we are commanded by God prior to the giving of the Torah. With the Avot, the patriarchs, and the Shvatim, when they served God, they were not commanded to do so. Only very specific mitzvot. So we would already know that. Why does he use the word etchem? And like we said before, the word etchem seems to be very problematic because it seems to be similar to the wicked son, because the wicked son uses the word etchem and we say, hey, now you're separating yourself from the Jewish people, and that's a major, major problem. You're disconnecting yourself. So why is the wise son using the word etchem? Question number 5. If the wise son has a general question about how mitzvot work after the giving of the Torah, why does he need to say ma'idot v'chokim v'mishpatim? Can't he just say ma mitzvot? Why does he need to specify each type of mitzvah? Now, we started explaining that the words edot, chokim, and mishpatim are 3 different types of mitzvot. We're going to review them because in order to be able to understand this mimer is really going to focus on the primary quality of the mitzvot that are referred to as edot. So edot, we said, comes from the word ed, which means witness. Edot are testimonies, and those are the mitzvot which represent something. They're testimony for something else. We keep Shabbat, as we said, to remind us that God created the world in 6 days and rested on Shabbat. And that's actually the reason why, if you ever wondered why we stand up when making Kiddush, the reason why we do so is because we are giving testimony when we're saying the words Vayechulu Hashamayim v'Haaretz v'chol tzva'am. And whenever somebody gives testimony in court, they need to stand. And likewise, many other mitzvot, all the holidays are edot, tefillin, tzitzit, other elements of Judaism which are representatives of something else are edot. Chukim, we explained, are decrees. They have no logical reason for them. Animal sacrifices. Shatnez, as we explained, the mixture of wool and linen. Now, there are explanations that we can give that give us some kind of insight into serving God, but those explanations are not the real reason for what's going on. The real reason is God says, I asked you to do it. And that's the reason why, interestingly enough, you have in these parshiot, you have the term, Yishei reach nichach laHashem, a pleasing smell to God. Now, it's kind of strange because that term is used most often when speaking about an ola, an animal that is burnt completely. Now, a regular barbecue, of course, smells good. You have meat burning. But when you have feathers and when you have the skin and bones burning, it's not actually a very pleasing smell at all. So the question is, what is this reach nichach laHashem? So Rashi explains that nachat ruach lefanai shamarti v'anaser itzon, that the term is not the smell, but the term comes from the word nachat ruach. I have pleasure from the fact that I asked you to do something and you're accomplishing what I asked you to do. So why is this specifically brought down with regards to the ola and not other sacrifices per se? Because the ola sacrifice gives no benefit to the owners and not even to the kohanim. And so therefore, in terms of that, it is the ultimate chok, it's the ultimate decree, because it makes no sense. Why should you completely and absolutely burn the animal up? I mean, PETA would have a field day, right? At least use the animal for some kind of purpose. And give the meat to somebody or use the skin for something. And God says, nope, this is what I want you to do. And this is what I want you to do. And it gives me, as God says, gives me great pleasure because of the fact that you are fulfilling what I asked you to do. Even if it has no logical, rational reasoning. That's a chok, a decree. As we're going to see, even it uses the term, the Medrash even uses the term, En lachem reshut laharher acharai. You don't have permission to question. Chukim are, that's what they are. And then you have mishpatim. Mishpatim, of course, are laws which are part of the average civil society has a system of laws. There are certain types of laws that the Torah uses that we would logically be able to infer without the Torah, God forbid, but we can come to those conclusions in any case. So the question is, why does he mention every one of these types of laws? He could have said, what are the mitzvot? And the Rebbe continues and says, this question becomes even stronger now that we know that the wise son's question has to do with the spiritual intention behind the mitzvah. Why? Because as we said, there are three types of mitzvot. Chukim are mitzvot which have no logical reason. And the examples that he includes here are kosher and the laws of purity and impurity. Edot are mitzvot that serve as a remembrance of an event or an idea such as sukkah, Shabbat, tefillin. And after Hashem tells them to do us, they make logical sense to us because they represent something else. So we got to explain when we say that he says that it makes logical sense to it. Eidot are logical because you need to have something physical to remind yourself of something else. But why did God choose black boxes with a shin on the side? Why can't the boxes be purple? Why do we need to have leather straps? Why can't we have plastic? So the details of the Eidot are beyond rationale. The fact that I need something to remember something else, that's not a big deal. That's something that I can understand. So when we talk about logic, we're talking about specifically in the area of the fact that I need a physical something to remind me of something else. But the actual choice that we have to do this and not that, the exact parameters of it, that a sukkah needs to be this particular size and it can't be bigger than that it has to have a certain type of schach and it can't have a different type of schach and all that kind of those details, that's beyond logic. And mishpatim are logical mitzvot that enable the world to run peacefully and smoothly, such as prohibition against theft and murder or the mitzvah to honor your parents, and in general, the system of laws such as they are. So despite their differences, the bottom line is that they all need to be done in a physical manner. So in his question, the son asked, so if the wise son is wondering how physical mitzvot require work, without any spiritual intention, why would he divide them up into categories that differ in the intention of the mitzvot? There's a big difference between all these three in terms of how you approach them. Eidot have a spiritual intention that you need to remember. I am keeping Shabbat for this particular reason. I'm keeping Sukkot for this particular reason. Mishpatim, you need to understand that the world runs based on a system of and society of law and civil order, and that needs to be part of it. The intention is an important part of it. Chukim, like we said, en reshut, en lachem reshut. That's something that's beyond rationale. I don't want you to define it by a particular reason. So if the question had been answered by saying that he's trying to tell the difference between before Mount Sinai and after Mount Sinai, before Mount Sinai, the focus was on intention and spiritual accomplishment. And afterwards is on the physical use of physicality in order to be able to connect with godliness. Why in that case is he mentioning these three degrees of mitzvot? If you would have said ma mitzvot, if you would have said all the mitzvot, then that would include everything together, and it would be much more understood how he's differentiating between prior to the giving of the Torah and afterwards. And if the wise son does have a question that differentiates between the different type of mitzvot, we don't seem to be addressing his question. And we'll quickly finish up over here because it's already 10:30. In his question, the wise son asks about each type of mitzvah individually. But in the answer that the Torah gives, it only mentions chukim. So why don't we address each mitzvah in the answer? Why is chukim the only one that's being mentioned up? So we have another two questions, I believe. And from there, we're going to finally start to do this deep dive into what is the wise son's question, what is going on. And in order to be able to understand that, we're going to dive into the whole idea of Eidot. Eidot is the first of the mitzvah that's mentioned. What is the quality of Eidot over Chukim and Mishpatim? And then why are we answering it with just the word Chukim? So that's where we're going to go from there. I need to work with Rabbi Smith to talk about Friday because I have a doctor's appointment, but we'll see what we can do. But in any case, I want to wish everybody a Chag Purim Sameach, a truly, truly joyous Purim for everybody across the entire world, God willing.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you so much. Thank you. Sei gesund.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.